Hi, you've reached the Talking Race Walking podcast. It's all about race walking, of course. It's talking to race walkers from around the world about race walking. Join me, Noel Payne, a amateur race walker in Canada, as I talk to elites, Olympians, record holders, masters walkers, and anybody who's out walking as fast as they can. Hi, so this is a section where I'd actually be talking to someone, a race walker. So this is where you can come in. If you know a race walker, you're a race walker, and you have an amazing story, I want to hear from you. So reach out, let's chat, let's get walking and talking. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Talking Race Walking. I once again have jumped from North America and gone across the pond to find a walker to talk to. Today, I have Richard McChesney on to talk about his walking. Welcome, Richard.
Hi, Noel. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. I'm honored to have you. Okay, so I am quickly going to go down and tell people, give them just a quick overview of who we're talking to, and then we can kind of get into you telling them about that. So you were basically a runner turned race walker. You have done a lot in your race walking career. You've got some crazy PBs that most race walkers who consider themselves race walkers these days probably wouldn't have on their athletic CV. I think most of race walkers these days, we know of the 20K, the 35K, and unfortunately what was the 50K events and the Olympics. And we know about, well, some of us, if you don't know about it, go Google pedestrianism, kind of where this whole sport started. But you have some New Zealand records for 100 miles, 20 hours, 44 minutes, 24 hours, 185 kilometers, 200 kilometers in 27 hours, 20 minutes. And you've gone for 6 days. You have the Commonwealth race walking record, fourth best in modern race walking history of 711.299 kilometers. So that's just a brief overview, folks, of who we're talking to. So when I say race walker, I think folks are thinking, those elites doing 20K race, and we tend to train like, kind of modern day runners where we're doing, 5 or 10K. We'll do a long run on the weekend. Richard, you're going past those distances. So first of all, tell me about the journey from going from runner to race walker. How did that happen?
So I started running when I was a teenager, and as firstly, you mentioned across the pond to the UK where I'm based, but people that recognise accents might recognise that I'm not a UK local. I was born in New Zealand, lived there for the first 40 years of my life, and then moved to the UK. I started running when I was a teenager, and I was a reasonably good runner, but I would generally spend 3 months of the year or more out injured because just my body couldn't handle the impact of running. And I also enjoyed the longer stuff. So while I was okay as a sort of a track runner, 1500, 5000, perhaps did a steeplechase as a junior as well, I preferred half marathon, and then eventually got into ultra marathon running. And I never listened to my body. I'd get injured. I'd keep running through the injury, and then I'd find I couldn't run at all. And
So
3
give me
months
an
later,
idea
I'd still be injured.
when you say good runner, because I want to kind of, there's a lot of race walkers now that are kind of, they take up race walking maybe when they're their 50s or 60s, or it's people who don't think they can run and take up race walking, and that's okay. But I also like to highlight folks who, weren't or were capable of running and then switch race. What kind of times were you running for your
So
events?
in my 20s, I was low 15 minutes for 5K, 32 minutes for 10K. had a reasonable marathon. Actually won our provincial marathon champs one year. Did a few triathlons, did the Ironman a few times. But as I say, I'd get fit, do a race, maybe not even get to the race because I'd then get injured, and it was just frustrating. And so I we moved over to the UK 2008. In 2010, I was back in New Zealand for work. I did a ultra marathon. It was 60 kilometers. I actually won the race, but there was a walker in it, and he was only a couple of hours behind me. And I got talking to him, and I decided next time I'm injured, I will try walking. And it took me probably 2 years. 2012 is when I finally said, right, I'm going to be a walker because I'm fed up being injured. And then it took me another 3 years to transition completely away from running. I thought of myself as a recovering runner. I was addicted to running, but I couldn't do it anymore. So I was looking for the next best thing. And now, I'm a much better walker than I ever was a runner in my view.
That's very interesting. I think there's a few of us out there who probably very much relate. Myself, I think I had that runner crisis where you realize at one point you're going, I'm walking more than I'm running, and I've identified as a runner for over 30 years. Same thing, and it is very interesting to make that shift. I still run, still capable, but I definitely put in more walking kilometers. So you went from runner, you started the race walking. Um, what
And when we talk about race walking, you know, your audience, the majority of them are what I would call race walkers. It is race walking, but I'm not fast. I've done 29:20 or something for 5K as a walker. Done an hour and 10 seconds for 10K, so not quite under the hour. But I found that I was much better. The longer the distance, the better I was. I
that's
am.
okay. I was kind of going to get around to that as well. And I mean, it's funny. I just picked up a book. If anybody's not familiar with the Israeli race walker Shal Labani, um, who he was reasonably quick, but he favored the ultra long distances as well. I just picked up on reading his book, and pedestrianism, where race walking kind of really got its start. Um, it was all about 6 day races and covering huge distances, not so much walking your brains out for 10 or 20K, which I think both are great. But I really wanted to touch base with you because you really are doing kind of the events and distances that really started this sport off. So I think it's interesting. So I'm not even sure I could maintain full legal, and fast pace over the distances you're doing. So you got into race walking and had, like you say, you were geared more for the long stuff, but how did you find out that that's what it was, that you weren't going to do the 5 or 10K race walk races? How did you fall into like doing ultra long stuff?
Because that guy I mentioned, his name is Andrew Shelley. He was at the time the New Zealand record holder for 100 kilometres, and I think he was about second or third best over 100 miles in 24 hours. And I thought I can do that well. He was my motivation, and so I went from dabbling with a bit of walking because I couldn't run to saying, well, I want to do a 24-hour race. And as a runner, I'd done a few 100-kilometer races, but I couldn't do anything further because of injuries. So my ambition, the moment I decided in 2012 I'm going to be a walker, my ambition was the New Zealand 24-hour race walking race in October 2013. So I basically had 14 months from August 2012 to October 2013 to get ready for that. But that was what I was aiming for. I never considered shorter distances.
That's
Um,
interesting. I mean, I think if you've done ultras running, then you know what it's like. As soon as you start hanging out with the ultra nuts, you get sucked in pretty quick. I mean, I've done 100K, 250K, same thing. Once you get into that world where people, you know, they don't even blink when you say 100K or whatever. They're game for longer and more. So I think it really encourages to think that way. Whereas if you're kind of hanging out with the the marathoners or if you're hanging out with the guys doing 10 or 20. Yeah, it never comes into discussion. But yeah, the ultra nuts, I consider myself kind of one of them. Once you get into that crowd, it's yeah, it definitely. Well, so once you veered into that, tell me about, you were talking about, your PBs for race walking, the shorter stuff aren't like lightning speed, but they're quick. That's just still quick times. What kind of walking do you do for, say, like, 100 miles or 6 day events? Because I'm also thinking about those pedestrianism days. And folks, like I say, Google it. These back in the day, people were doing insane paces um, for, 6 day events nonstop pretty much. But we don't know really what kind of technique they were using. It wasn't called
On
race
top,
walking back then. So
yeah.
what do you do for that long?
And on top of that, if you read about those athletes from especially the 1800s, mid late 1800s, they were supposedly walking 800 plus kilometers, 500 plus miles in 6 days. Yet, when you read about their events, often the laps were mismeasured. So they were often short indoor circuits that were, published as being 150 meters a lap, but they were 130 meters a lap. And they had manual counting that was often, not accurate as well. And the other thing is they were fed substances that would be banned now. And they even had their trainers whipping them if they weren't going fast enough or needed to stay awake. So, you take those distances they were walking with a grain of salt. I can't remember what your question was actually.
Sure. So, but going back and I definitely do agree. If people haven't read about it, the heyday of pedestrianism was slightly bonkers, if I would say. The competitions were often a gong show. Thousands of people out, trainers, alcohol, betting, strange stuff going on, different characters, whipping, strychnine and coffee and alcohol. It was definitely strange, but there were a lot of decently fast walkers. Records, yeah, probably a little questionable. So when you do it, we think of race walking, at the Olympic events and world championships. We see that type of race. What kind of walking are you maintaining for that period of time?
Okay, so being a Canadian podcast, let's talk in kilometers rather than miles.
We can
Being
we
a,
can we can switch back and forth, but I always say the Olympics and the World Championships use kilometers. We'll stick with that for now, if it's good with you.
and being a New Zealander, we're a metric country as well. It's just the problem is I live in the UK, so quite often people don't understand kilometers, but
I
I
know,
prefer
yeah.
kilometers. So when I started walking, I would average around about 8 kilometers an hour in training, and the rule for anything longer than 50 kilometers, the only rule for race walking is 1 foot on the ground at all times. Um, Judges will, if they think you're, kind of bouncing or using more of a running style, even if you've got 1 foot on the ground, they'll, give you a red card. But generally, the rule is 1 foot on the ground all times. And I found when I first started, which was, as I say, 2015, was 2012 to 2015, I was getting into it. By 2015, 2016, I was regularly doing several 24-hour races a year, and I could quite comfortably train at 8 kilometers an hour. And you said my best 100 mile is 20 hours 40 odd. That is just under 7.5 kilometers an hour. And the rule I always have is any race that I don't need to sleep in, which is generally anything less than, say, 36 hours, I don't sit down as well. No stopping at all. So I'm pretty much averaging that pace the whole time. I've had a few injuries and a few setbacks that have meant that I don't train as fast as I used to, and I can't race as fast. So I doubt that I'd ever get back under the 21-hour mark for 100 miles. But I can still walk 170 odd kilometers in 24 hours, which is about 820 average pace, something like that per kilometer. And in a 6 day race, that is my target is around 165, 170K in the first day. Keep going until I need some sleep, depending on what time of the day the race starts, as to when I need that first sleep. And then thereafter, the idea is as little sleep as possible, but you need some sleep to recover. And you're going slower. When I did the 711 kilometers, my slower laps were getting around probably 13, 14, 15 minutes per kilometer, so quite slow, but you just keep on going. And in that last 6-day race I did last year, when I did 711 kilometers, 8.5 hours sleep over 6 days. In the last 4 days, well, I didn't sleep the last 24 hours. I slept different amounts in the first 2 days, but days 3, 4, 5, 20 minutes sleep every 6 hours. The idea was less time off my feet. I could basically come in, lie down, not even bother taking my shoes off, lie down, sleep 20 minutes. I could be back on the track 25 minutes after I left it, because my muscles didn't have time to sort of, seize up, stiffen up, because I wasn't off the track for long enough, and I wasn't mucking around at all either. So while the pace is slow, the actual walking pace, I didn't have the downtime.
Yeah,
And
no, exactly.
and
I think
yeah,
that's pretty impressive. I mean, all of this is it just makes me think, oh, and I got a Patrick Doyle, who I just chatted with the other week. If you're listening to this, you should definitely start searching out some ultra events, because I think this is probably where you would really fit. He's kind of like that walker, slight power walker who's picking up the race walk technique, but he likes the longer stuff. And this stuff would really suit it. And it really is suited that person who just wants to go. And like you're saying, um, oftentimes some of the walkers will actually beat runners because you're not stopping for rest. It's not beating you up as much as the running is. So you can maintain that solid pace all the way through. That's impressive.
you, you don't have the impact in your legs that the runners do. So that 711 kilometers last year, I finished second overall. One runner beat me, a guy by the name of Bob Hearn, which some of your listeners might have listened to. He's US based. He had at least twice as much sleep as I did, because he needed the sleep,
Yeah.
because whether he needed the sleep, he needed more time for his legs to recover from that pounding. He's actually a very good walker as well. He doesn't, as far as he's concerned, he's a runner, but he can switch from running to walking just the click of a finger, and his walking style is really good. He's a very fast walker as well. So yeah, one day he might, come to our side perhaps and just try walking instead.
He just hasn't had that midlife crisis like the two of us have had, right? That's all.
Yes, that's the one. Yeah.
So that is pretty amazing. I'm assuming your 6-day event as well. You had like a support team or whatever. Nobody whipping you, I'm assuming.
No, but yeah, I'm very lucky. A woman by the name of Sarah Lightman, whose father was actually an Olympic race walker at Mexico City in
Oh
1968.
wow.
And anyway, she still walks, and she does a bit of ultra running as well. We invited her a couple of years ago to join us as our support crew, and she actually, well, she says she loves it. I hope she does. She'll be back as my support crew next month for this same 6-day race. And I couldn't do it without her, because it does mean that I don't need to think about anything. I can come in, all my food's prepared for me. I don't need to waste time for anything. Although last year I did, and that's where I'm going to make some time up this year, is as well as 8.5 hours sleep, I had that much again off the track. There was something like 18 hours or so off the track in total, which is too much. I need to cut that down so as I can be out there walking. And also, I believe I'm going to be mentally tougher this year. I've done 5 6-day races. Every year I've improved, and every year I've learned more every year. I'm certain that my mental toughness is much more than it has been in previous years, and I can keep that pace rather than letting it slip down to the 13, 14, 15 minutes per kilometre. I should be able to keep it at 10 or 11 minutes at the slowest, and that's going to make a big difference as well.
No, that like I say, I think anybody who's done ultras, it's being physically ready to do it and prepare. But yeah, the mental aspect of things plays into things so much more. I actually probably am more suited to ultra than I am the high intense stuff I mental game is the hardest one for me with short, intense stuff. But I've done a bunch of ultras, and I've often found that the stress and the anxiety is a little bit different. It's like it's stretched out over a longer distance almost. So it's there, but it's less. It's almost about just keeping going, which I think I can deal with. Whereas I'll go to, let's say, like a 5K or a 10K, and it's time, it's pace, it's the start line, it's nerves. Whereas I go to an ultra, I'm like, yeah, I cleared the day. I'm just going to be walking or running for the day. Right? It's a different kind of thing to deal with.
And the pain is completely different.
Yeah.
After a few days of walking in a 6 day race, you're in pain, but it's almost like it's more tolerable. In a 5K, I say, I think 29:20 is my best. I could never go faster than that because I just couldn't push myself through that pain barrier. And as a runner, the same. I couldn't push myself through that pain barrier I needed to. Um, but I can, handle it at a less intense level, a different kind of pain for longer. It's just completely different.
I think that's very interesting. I think it might open up some listeners' minds as well to, not everybody is suited for one event to the other. I think we find out it is, especially those who have started running. I mean, not everybody's a 100-meter sprinter. But then you kind of move up in my 400 meters, in my 15, or am I more that sort of middle to long distance? So sometimes I think we forget about that perhaps in the race walking world where it's limited most of the time to certain events. We don't think about, am I more suited to really short or is it really long that I might excel at? So I think this might open up people's minds to, oh, I can walk at a decent pace and I could go forever, but I only do 10Ks. You don't have that opportunity to check out and see what your limits are.
And if by chance you have any runners that are listening to this that are thinking, well, my running days are over because I can't handle the injuries, like it was my case, I would absolutely recommend it. You get as much, if not more, out of walking. And also, running's not a lot faster, but you actually see a lot more when you're out there training as well. And I really enjoy the training. My current training is I have Sundays and Mondays off. Sunday to spend with my family, Monday as a sort of a recovery day when I'm back at work. I then walk around 3.5 to 4 hours every morning before work, leaving before daylight. But I actually see places, I go places. So every time I'll go somewhere different. It's only roughly 4.5 kilometers from home to work, but I will walk 26, 28K, just going somewhere along the way. And then a longer walk on Saturday, anything up to 12 hours. And I really enjoy the adventure side of that training, being able to go places. And again, being a former runner, I found that I had to run off road to try and avoid injury, and I still got injured, but you need the softer surface. That restricted me. I could run beside the river, and that was pretty much it in the parks as well. But I can go anywhere, and one of the things I enjoy is covering different areas of London and seeing different places that I might not have seen as a runner, and if I did see as a runner, I was going too fast to notice them anyway.
That's right, because I think one of your claims to fame is you went around London and basically, I guess it would be the equivalent to subway stations, or you basically hit everyone in London. Was that about right?
So when we had the lockdown pandemic, we had a brief period between two major lockdowns in the UK where we were allowed to go out and do things. Lots of sports hadn't started again. There were no races. So I decided that I would see if I could walk to all 270 tube stations. And so I mapped out the best route. So it was less distance. It worked out at about 525 kilometres. I thought I could do that in 4 days. I think it took me 5 days 20, and then 5 days 20 hours, and then 5 days 12, something like that. But yes, basically started and finished at the same station and visited all 270, became the first or only person ever to visit all 270 stations non-stop on foot. And then Transport for London opened two new tube stations the following year, which, if I'd done my research, I would have been aware, but I hadn't checked that out. So it's now something I need to do again one day.
I love it. I do like the aspect of I think even before I took up race walking, I like you, I on foot, it's just, yeah, you explore more. I mean, yeah, I often, my ultras, I always did trail ultras when I was running just because I wanted to see something. I either didn't want to run on the pavement or I didn't want to run around in circles. It didn't interest me. But that is one question I did have. So your 6 day race, I mean, I always, when I try and do long stuff, I always try to find like I've run the Grand Canyon, I've done places like that where I'm seeing it's an adventure. Now, your 6 day races, now that was a little tiny loop around a track or something, was it? How far
So,
how many laps or what was the length of your lap?
so all 5 6 day races I've done so far have been the same race, and it's been two different locations. So the first location was terrible. It was a partially on an old sort of ash type track with a lot of grit, partly on tarmac around the outside of the stadium. Lots of potholes. It was not a good course at all. The last 2 years they've been in a holiday park and a motor camp, and we've actually had little chalets beside the track they've been able to sleep in. So 1 kilometre, 1.1 kilometre circuit, slightly undulating, probably from one end of the course to the other is about 4 or 5 metre elevation change. Once you've done 400 laps, 500 laps, that can be quite substantial. But yeah, it's like any race walking event. For you to have race walking judges, it needs to be a short circuit so the judges can keep an eye on you. And I really enjoy it, especially on nights 5 and 6, where having done 400, 500 laps, you think you're in somewhere completely new. You don't realize that you've been walking the same track. Could start hallucinating, and that's a completely different subject. I can tell you about some of my. Actually, I'm complete tangent. I'm reasonably famous in the UK for a terrible hallucination I had. I was doing a 400 kilometre canal race, just along the side of Canal Big Loop, 20 odd kilometres from the end, probably 85 hours into the race. It was just after COVID, and I thought I was in a COVID detention centre, and I thought I was asking German farmers to rescue me.
Oh
And
God.
I ended up in an ambulance. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, and they were railway workers replacing a railway line beside we were walking at that particular part of the night. And they couldn't tell I was in a race because it got cold. I'd put my jacket over my race number, and I don't know whether they thought I was escaped from a mental asylum or something, but they decided they better call an ambulance. And as a result, I was DQ'd from that race. But I've had some really fascinating hallucinations, and they seem so vivid at the time. And as I say, the 6 day races, most of the 6 day races, the last 2 nights, definitely the last night, I've hallucinated, not knowing that I'm, walking the same track I've been doing for the last, 5.5 days.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Those are so there is definitely some mental fortitude required and some the brain can also play tricks on you. I've sort of been there myself. Um, and I can't imagine doing that many laps. I haven't done it. I think we won't get into it here because I want to wrap it up in a couple minutes, but I've always tried to push to see if we could have more walking or race walking events that are kind of like point to point to try and promote the sport as well. I find even ultra walking or race walking, we tend to sort of be a lot of the time sort of closeted off, walking ourselves silly, in a little circle, nobody sees us. Or even at the Olympics, it's a kilometer or 2 kilometer loop. We aren't often visible. I'd love to see some of those, point to point races. I think there's one in Europe or France that's done annually. Those kind of things are neat. I know it's harder to judge, but I love seeing people out and making it visible to a lot more folks as well. I'd love to see more of that. I've got a couple questions before we wrap things up. One, um, what is your regular training pace? You mentioned the training. What would your normal pace be like when you're going out and doing 2 or 3 hours in the morning before work? What would your training pace
um, at the moment, around about 8 minutes, 10 seconds per kilometre. And generally it starts off slow. I always, again, going back to the injuries as a runner, I always walk the first kilometre really slow and use as my warm-up, so generally 9 minutes or even slower for the first kilometre. And also because I'm walking in the dark when I leave home at the moment, I always find walking in the dark is slower. And I used to run the dark slow. It was always slow. I don't know why. So it's not until I get to daylight that it starts to pick up. But my average pace over a whole 3.5 hour walk before work is around 8:10, maybe 8:20 per kilometre. And I still do on a Saturday when I do my long walk. I'll generally walk 3+ hours to the local parkrun. You have parkrun in Canada. I don't know where you live, whether you have parkrun. Local 5K. I will walk 3 hours or more to a parkrun. I will then do parkrun as my speed work. Even after 3 hour walk, I'm still there in 32 minutes on
Nice.
average. And then I'll walk home, sometimes even longer. This Saturday will be 3 or 4 hours to parkrun, and I want to do 12 hours in total. So, but my speed work's in the middle, and it's still reasonably quick. So yeah, that's the sort of pace I'm training at.
No, that's impressive. I mean, I've run, I've walked casually, so I kind of know what those paces are. I kind of know, like, the casual walk where the limit is, and then when you have to sort of switch up technique a little bit and what that gets you, and then when a race walker really starts. So that's decently quick pace. Anybody who isn't a race walker is listening, try and go out and see how quickly you can walk. And then either, do a power walking technique or whatever. You'll see that if you're not really given it, it's hard to hit that 8 kilometers or under. So that is impressive.
It
Two
does
last
take a
questions.
little bit of mental concentration to do that. And the
Oh
other
yeah.
thing is generally my Saturday walks are actually my fastest, especially the one after parkrun when I'm walking home because it's daylight for the whole of that
Yeah.
walk. But my idea, because I'm training for the 6 day races, is gradually over the week, my legs get tighter and tighter, my body gets
Yeah.
tighter and tighter, because I need to train to be able to walk, when I'm tired. And so that's the whole idea of 5 consecutive days of training, with the last day of that 5 days being the really long day.
No, that makes sense. So two last questions I've got for you. One's an easy one. Um, well, actually, they're both fairly easy. So we'll tie this up. First of all, um, before we let you go, what have you got coming up on your radar in terms of races or goals? What do you want to do this year?
So I've already kind of alluded to it. Next month, staying 20th of April, I'll be back in France for the annual 6 day race I do over there. Um, when is this podcast going to be published?
Well, it'll probably come out the next few weeks. So we're in right now, folks. We're in March 2024. This podcast will probably come out shortly following the podcast. So it's gonna be March, April. So springtime in Canada.
Okay, so potentially if anyone's interested in following that, they could search for, I go under the name of Richard Walks London. You can find me on Twitter and Facebook, and I will publish a link to the live results, so people can track that if they're interested. My goal is definitely more than what I've done. 711, I know I can go further. In April last year, after the race, I thought I'd be able to do 500 miles, which no one has ever done in a 6 day race. World record is 489 miles, which is about 787 kilometers or something. And I've actually beaten the world record holder in the 2 times I've raced him in that same race. I don't know that my training's gone well enough to do that, but somewhere between 711 and 804, which is 500 miles, is my goal. We will see what happens that
Oh my
particular
God.
week.
Well, you
And
stole my last question about where people can find you. So Richard Walks
okay,
London. If you just Google, we've all got most of us have the internet. If you don't have the internet, you're probably not listening to this. So, anyways, find him on Facebook, type it into Google, you'll find him. An amazing walker. I can't even get my head around even thinking about 500 miles in 6 days, though I'm crazy enough to go figure out the pace. And yeah, I'm going to try not to listen to Richard too much. Or I figure I might start doing some of this stuff. Who knows? Richard, once again, thank you for coming. This has been a really cool chat. And if you're ever over in Canada, connect. We'll get out for a walk. And if I'm ever over there, I'll find you. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
absolutely. Thanks very much.
All right. Happy walking, Richard. Happy walking, everyone. And hope you enjoyed the podcast and tune in for the next one.
That's it, folks. The end of the podcast. No walkers have been harmed in the recording of this podcast. And, of course, at the moment, we have no sponsors or supporters at this point to fund all this amazing podcasting. But if you're out there and have a race walk company that produces some sort of race walk apparel product or something you think race walkers would love, get hold of us. We'd love to have you on board. Give us a holler.